Math 113. This is a video of what we did today, Monday the, I don't know what day it is, 20th, Monday the 20th, in our Zoom class. So today we talked about multiplying fractions. So if we think about our definition that we've been using for multiplying, we've been saying one way to think about it is that we have A groups and B items in each group. And we can extend that out to help us with multiplying fractions as well. So let's say we have 3 times 2/3. So this means we have 3 groups, and each group is 2/3 of a whole. Okay, so let's think about how we could represent that. If this rectangle is our whole, and we have 2/3 of it shaded, so there's one group of 2/3, and we want 3 of those groups. So we have the same size whole things, just kind of pretend that mine are the same size, and we have 3 groups. Each of those groups is 2/3. Okay, so we can see that this definition explains what we have here, okay? Now, if we want to kind of combine this a little bit, we can take this third and put it here, and we could take this third and put it here, right? And make 2 whole things. Okay, so we could move these around, not have this one anymore. And if we think about dividing fractions, if we remember how we do it, if we have 3 times 2/3, I can make this a fraction also by putting it over 1. And then we multiply straight across the top and straight across the bottom, and we can get 6/3, which does reduce down to 2, just like we saw here. The other thing we can do is we can look for a common factor between the top and the bottom, numerators and the denominators, in this case 3. So 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 3 once. I have just 2/1, which again is just 2. So really I either divide out the 3's here or I divide them out at this point. When I am multiplying fractions, I don't need common denominators. I multiply the top, the numerator, I multiply the denominator. Okay, so let's look at another one. What if we have, erase this here. What if we have 1/2 times 14? So 1/2 times, actually let's do a little smaller. Let's do 1/2 times 6. Saves a little drawing. Okay, so this means I have half of a group, and that group has 6 items in it. Okay, so if I have my group of 6 items, and here's one group, I want half of a group. So there's my half of a group. Okay. Let's think about what happens when we multiply. Half times 6/1. Again, we can get 6/2 and then divide. Or we could look for common factors between either numerator and either denominator. 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 6 3 times. Again, we get 3. Okay, so just take a minute to make sure you understand this. This is half a group. The group has 6, we just want half of it, so we get 3. Okay. And finally, let's look at one that is 1/2 times 3/4. So again, we could say this is half of a group, and there's 3/4 in the group. So if we have our whole and we split it into 4 equal parts, and I color 3 of them, this is 3/4 right here. Okay? This is my group of 3/4. I don't want this whole group. I want half of it. So how am I going to do that? Well, here's my group, are these 3 blocks. What if I cut them in half like this, and I just take half of that? Okay, so this blue shaded part is half of 3/4, which is this thing right here. So let's see what happens when I multiply. So if I have 1/2 times 3/4, I multiply across the top, I multiply across the bottom, I get 3/8. Where does 3/8 come from? Well, if we look at our original whole, which is the entire box, and I extend this line out, I see now that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 identical parts. And I have 1, 2, 3 of them shaded. Okay, so when we are dealing with fractions, decimals, or percents, in this case we're looking at fractions and we're multiplying, another way we can think about this is to replace, in our head, replace the multiplication sign with the word of. Okay, or it goes the other way too. If in a problem we're trying to find half of something, that's going to tell us to multiply. So half of 3/4, right? That's what we found here. This was 3/4. We took half of it. Okay, let's look at another one like this. So let's say we have 2/3 times 1/2, not 1/4. 2/3 times 1/2. So again, if it helps, you can think of this as 2/3 of 1/2. Either way. So, or we can go back to our original multiplication definition, and we can think about this being 2/3 of a group, and that group is a half. So let's think about how we do this. We have our whole thing right here. If I want half of that, if I want to represent half, I'm just going to cut it in half, and I'm going to shade half of it. Now I come over to this part, and I want 2/3 of something. Do I want 2/3 of the whole thing? No, right? I want 2/3 just of the shaded part. So these two fractions have different wholes. Okay? This is half of the entire thing. But then this is just 2/3 of the 1/2 part. Okay, so here I'm finding a half of the whole thing, and now I'm finding 2/3 of just this half. How do I find 2/3 of this? Well, if I want it in thirds, I break it into 3 even parts, equal sized parts, and I want 2 of them. So 1, 2. Okay. What do we get when we multiply these? Well, I would get 2/6. 2 times 1 is 2, 3 times 2 is 6. Where is that 2/6? Well, again, if I extend these so I break that into equal size parts. Remember we were talking about common denominators, and denominators really talk about the size of the pieces. So I want all these sizes of these pieces to be the same. The entire thing is in 6, because my answer is what part of the whole do I have? The whole thing. Okay, so I have 2 out of 6 even parts that I would have if I cut it up evenly. Okay. All right, so then what we did today is we looked at some examples where something is shaded, and we tried to figure out what fraction of the fraction of the whole thing was shaded. Okay, so the first one we looked at was this one. So we have a box like this, and so what we're trying to say is this of this is shaded. Okay, these will each be fractions. So half of 1/8 is shaded, or whatever you're going to have. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one looks like this. So, like that. Okay, and again, something of something is shaded. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pause the video and think about what two fractions would go in here. Okay, so what portion of a portion of the whole is shaded? And same thing here, what fraction of the whole is shaded? Okay, so hopefully you pause the video. Okay, so we want to look at these and want to figure out, so some portion, remember this is the fraction of the first division. This is the fraction of the entire thing. So if you're looking here, we have the whole thing. What did we split it into first? Well, we split it into thirds. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we had these thirds, and the part that's shaded is just in one of those thirds. So some part of 1/3 is shaded. Here's my 1/3. Okay. Well, what fraction of this 1/3, not of the whole thing, what fraction of this 1/3 is shaded? Well, this 1/3 is split into 4 parts, and one of them is shaded. So first, just make sure that this makes sense to you. So 1/4, 1 out of 4 parts, of the 1/3 is shaded. If I multiply this, I would get 1/12. Does that make sense? Well, if I were to split all of these thirds in the same equal pieces, so now the entire piece, the entire whole is in the same size pieces, I should say. I have 12 pieces and one of them is shaded. So again, this is of the whole. This is of the shaded, or the original division, I'll say, right? So I divided it into 3. Now 1/4 of this is back to being of the whole thing. 1/12 of the whole thing is shaded. Okay, let's look at this one. What fraction of what fraction? Again, you look at this, the whole thing, we can see that first it was split into fourths. And all of my shading here is in 1/4. So a part of 1/4 is shaded. What part? Well, this is split into 5 equal pieces, and 3 out of those 5 are shaded. So 3/5 of 1/4. Again, if we kind of check it, 3/20. Well, where do I get 20 from? If all 4 of those parts had been split into fifths, that's 20, 3 of them are shaded. I didn't shade anymore, I just broke the rest up so that it was in the same size pieces. Okay, then we did 2 other problems. 3 other problems, I guess, actually. So I'm going to stop the video, and then I'll be right back with those 3 problems.